All right, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2013 GE Sustainability Leaders Series. My name is Stuart DeCue. I'm the Program Director at the Yale Center for Business and the Environment. Thank you for coming. People are going to be filtering in and grabbing lunch. Welcome to our online audience on the Yale YouTube channel. This talk, as I said, is brought to you by the Yale Center for Business and the Environment in partnership with the GE Foundation, and will be broadcast simultaneously through the Yale YouTube channel. The Sustainability Leaders Series brings thought leaders to campus to speak and engage with students and faculty about the challenges and opportunities for implementing sustainability within their respective organizations. Today we are quite pleased to welcome Gary Lawrence, Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer of AECOM, for a conversation with Professor Paul Anastas on big questions for a better built environment. We'll have about 30 minutes of facilitated discussion between Paul and Gary, and then we'll be taking questions from the audience. A brief introduction about Paul. Paul is the Teresa and H. John Hines Professor in Practice of Chemistry and the Environment and the Director of the Center for Green Chemistry and Green Engineering at Yale. Dr. Anastas has published widely on topics of science through sustainability, including 11 books, such as Benign by Design, Designing Safer Polymers, Green Engineering, and his seminal work with co-author John Warner, Green Chemistry, Theory and Practice. In addition, Paul is a collaborator, a friend, someone who is pushing folks both in academia, the student population, people in the private sector to figure out new ways of collaborating and coming together. So he is the perfect person to facilitate a discussion of this type. Welcome to Paul and Gary, and I'll hand it over to Paul.
Thank you, Stuart. First of all, let me say congratulations to the Center for Business and the Environment, because this program is exactly the type of thing that we need to be doing more of and focusing on, and it's quite a tribute to CBAE that this program is as successful as it is. And marking that, and I should say personifying that, is our guest today, Gary Lawrence. When we talk about thought leaders in the area of sustainability, leaders in positions of major influence and impact, Gary Lawrence does personify that. So we're very lucky to have him, and welcome. So Gary, as Stuart mentioned, is the Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer for AECOM. AECOM is an $8 billion global corporation that provides professional and technical management support services across a wide range of sectors, with over 45,000 employees worldwide, architects, engineers, designers, planners, scientists, and on. So it really has the big perspective on what is necessary in order to think about not only where we are in terms of infrastructure today, but where we need to go in the future. As everybody in this room, of course, knows, the infrastructure that we build today is going to be around for quite a long time and have an impact for a long time. So, Gary has a very diverse background, everything from teaching at the University of Washington, on the faculty of the University of Washington, to being the Director of Planning for the City of Seattle, and has been with, as well as leading smaller enterprises in the area of sustainability, and has been with AECOM for how many years now?
3 years.
For 3 years. So what I'd like to just start off with is sort of an overarching question of, could you tell us a little bit about AECOM, its global mission, but even more important, bringing it down to how it looks to advance sustainability?
Well, our mission statement is that we design, protect, and build in ways to increase sustainability, increase security, and a variety of other things. Now, its mission statements sometimes are greenwash, some other kind of wash. Actually, we pretty much live that motto, the focus on our obligation to make money for our shareholders while improving conditions for human development around the world. And so we talk about sustainability, for instance, not as a green idea, but as the framework for mastering complexity. And mastering complexity in ways that improve value and reduce risk. So the company is actually being built to manage complexity better than any other organization on the planet. And it's not all complexity, but we touch every aspect of urban development and human habitation. So it's those systems and the connective tissue between urban centers where we're primarily focused.
So what are some of the big types of focus areas? I'm hearing architecture, water systems. Give us a flavor for some of those places where AECOM plays. I know it's probably tougher to say where it doesn't play.
Well, in China, for instance, we design whole cities for new cities for up to 5 million people. We've been doing some of that. Brings together all of our disciplines. And I have to stop here. AECOM is all about interdisciplinarity. We know that there are some issues where we have to go very deep and get highly technical. But if we do that in a way that we're not always thinking about how this connects to that, we can't actually serve our clients and help them. So city making is one thing we do. We're in a joint venture as the designers and the construction managers for the new 2nd Avenue subway in New York. We're the designers, we were the designers for the London Olympics, and we're the designers for the Rio Olympics. We work on things like transportation systems, high-speed rail systems, as we're one of the participants in high-speed rail consortia all over the world. So again, we've grown from a collection of companies about 20 years ago. There were 26 companies into a much bigger group. And some of our competitors refer to us as the Borg because most of our growth from 15,000 to now 47,800. I checked the numbers on the train coming up, and evidently we acquired something. But all that growth is really focused on this notion that we only make money if our clients are successful, and our clients need help in understanding how one thing relates to another so they can leverage their investments and gain advantage.
So the scale is daunting that you work on. When you think about the mega trends, whether it's climate change, whether it's resource depletion, whether it's rapid urbanization, can these megatrends and do these megatrends affect strategic decision making at a Fortune 500 company like AECOM?
Well, they affect our strategy in a couple of ways. First of all, we have clients that are really worried about certain aspects of change. And they will come in and push us to get better at helping them be successful in that change environment. And then sometimes we actually have to be ahead of our clients. So I'm on a number of committees around the world, and one of them is the World Economic Forum's Climate Change Council. There we're thinking about adaptation and resilience and how it relates to security and human populations around the world. So the energy, water, waste, and food nexus, and how those things react to one another so that we can be thought leaders in helping our clients, again, figure out where they ought to be rethinking their approach, changing their question set, because we find within the company and out doing business that unless you've gotten the question right, it's impossible to come up with anything that works. And I know that in my past, I have created really magnificent disasters by going out to solve a problem and finding out later it was only an attribute of the issue rather than a fundamental part of it. So if there's anything I can say to you, be really careful about fundamentals and attributes, because if you're just dealing with the attributes, you're going to be wasting a lot of your time, because it won't get at the problem.
And I just want to say, that for those of you that are in my class, I didn't make him say that. So are there certain principles or frameworks that you use to drive or promote resource efficiency in, across supply chains and things for your clients?
Yeah, I have 3 roles in the company, and one of my roles is the efficiency of AECOM as an enterprise. You know, we have offices in 130 countries, and so getting at this notion of a supply chain or that sort of thing is difficult. We're doing things like increasing our investments in telepresence, which is a brand of communication tool where it's like you're sitting right across the table from someone, even though they might be 3,000 or 4,000 miles away. Because we find that a single telepresence room equates to about 11 international business class round trips. So if we can reduce the amount of flying we do, we reduce the amount of kerosene that's being burned at high altitudes and we're also increasing the efficiency and improving the work-life balance of our employees, because when you get to be my age, travel is no longer interesting nor fun. I had a meeting with the Minister of the Environment for Singapore, you know, and it's a 19-hour direct flight from New York for a 4-hour meeting and a 19-hour flight back. Made no environmental sense. Critically important client to us, and telepresence wouldn't have worked for that. But there are a number of other things, particularly within the organization, where we can do that. We are dramatically reducing the amount of greenhouse gases in our own supply chain. That's for 2 reasons. First of all, it's the right thing to do. It's going to reduce our costs. The second is that in order for us to be a supplier to firms like Shell or anybody in the oil and gas business, to be part of their supply chain, you have to demonstrate you are a continuous improvement program in terms of reducing CO2 emissions. So we're pushed from above when we want to be part of the supply chain, and we're also holding our suppliers accountable for that, because they have to report up through us to do this. There are a lot of economic drivers for this, but it's also the right thing to do. And it's critically important for us because we're in a global competition for talent all the time. And the people entering the organization have expectations. You know, they come out of schools like this, they have expectations for corporate behaviors. And if we can't meet those expectations, then they'll leave and go somewhere else. Because while you may not admit to it, your generation is not loyal to the companies you work for. I got suckered into loyalty and hurt me in patent, but I'm really happy to be part of AECOM. So if we can't continually demonstrate to you that our company cares about the future in material ways related to the environment, to the skill sets, those sorts of things, we can't possibly succeed. So there are all sorts of issues that are driving our behavior.
So in your position, do you primarily focus on making AECOM more sustainable, or how your work with your clients is more sustainable, or a division of both?
Actually, a division of 3 things.
Mm-hmm.
So part of it is our internal operations and reporting. We report under the Global Reporting Initiative, a variety of other things, and we report on our corporate social responsibility. That all comes under my umbrella. I'm also the enterprise's global talking head on sustainability. So our people around the world invite me to come and meet their clients or to conferences that are important in their spheres to talk about these issues. And I also am part of a number of what we call win teams, trying to figure out for a particular client who's issued an RFP or is interested in work, how we can position ourselves authentically to be their preferred choice without having to go to the lowest cost every single time. And the lowest cost issues, some of them are worried about that, but most of them are worried about value. And how do we make sustainability part of their value proposition? And my role is to help with that.
Mm-hmm. So when you're exploring how to bring about resource efficiencies in your clients or internally, are there some notorious barriers that are just the most problematic, and what approaches have you found that are successful?
Well, there are more barriers than easy pathways to opportunity. I'll put it that way. One of the barriers that you're all going to be dealing with as you enter organizations of various types is the conventional wisdom that's embedded above you. A lot of people find it risky professionally to think too much when they've gotten away with doing the same way over and over, and they've never gotten called on it. So change is, and the inability or unwillingness to make change happen fluidly is a big barrier. I often say that conventional wisdom is the biggest barrier to sustainability.
You're not challenging the status quo, are you?
I am. And that's because nobody actually knows what sustainability means. And the other big barrier to sustainability is really an inappropriate amount of certainty. Because if we're not learning all the time through science and those sorts of things and bringing that into the conversation, then we're going to be able to be really good at solving the problem just as a new one has emerged, because we'll be focusing on the past rather than the future. So that's a barrier. One of the barriers is also the financial side of things. Many owners are still convinced that being more sustainable means that the price of their project is going to go up. In this recent and continuing economic circumstance, the notion that I'm going to invest in sustainability just because it's the right thing to do has been taken off the table, except for owner-occupied spaces or for people for whom it's critical to their brand or their ideology or their culture. So our challenge is to help them understand how they can actually, again, be more financially successful doing things differently. And in my experience, we haven't done a very good job of bringing the finance people to the table to figure out how to make the business case for these things. Engineers, and I'm not an engineer, but I'm a planner by background. There's a saying that to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. To a planner, everything looks like a planning problem, and to an engineer, everything looks like an engineering problem, and finance goes on and on and on. Figuring out how, as you're doing your problem identification, you can get away from those discipline-based problem identification into something broader, which is necessary if we're right in thinking that this is about complexity, it's not about being green. Mm-hmm. Then that's absolutely necessary.
So let me shift gears slightly and ask you, might be a philosophical question. What do you think is the appropriate role of the private sector in developing these resilient communities, adaptable communities, communities writ large, and the pace of some of the mega trends, the mounting environmental pressures that we mentioned earlier?
I've had a lot of time to think about this, because I spent about 18 years in government. Before that, I ran NGOs, and then I've been in the private sector since then. I think the private sector has the key role in terms of the efficiency of resource allocation. If you can create pricing schemes and that really make resources cost, what they actually cost, then I think we can go a long way with policy direction solving the problem. You know, there'll be early adopters on the private side, and you don't want to inhibit them from going forward, but there'll be people who drag behind, and you need a regulatory environment in order to bring them along. The NGOs are also critical because they tend to be the conscience of the whole thing. But all three sides tend to misunderstand motives, misunderstand the triggers, those sorts of things. When I was at the University of Washington, I and a guy from the business school teaching in sustainability had a class, had some academic name, of course, but the real name was, where does money come from and where does it go? Because if you don't know that, there's no way you can actually create the incentives and the levers necessary to get the behaviors of all the players engaged. I think we do a fantastic job within our company, and a number of our competitors also do fantastic jobs in trying to push the envelope. When the client pushes back, we accommodate the client. And when we can get the conversation about return on investment right, the client doesn't push back nearly so far.
Mm-hmm. So that's the private sector. When you start thinking about the role of multinational corporations, to what degree is it appropriate, desirable, necessary for them to work with governments to craft legislation, policies, regulation that move in this positive direction towards sustainability?
Well, we think that it's critical that the private sector, multinationals, be engaged in this. Many people are critical of that role because the assumption is that we're trying to cut a deal to exempt us from doing the right thing. The reality is that governments will eventually regulate it and won't really know how to get the most out of us in the regulatory regime they're discussing. So if we're not at the table talking to them about, okay, if these are our concerns, here's what our shareholders care about, here's what it means in terms of our business, and get clear about that, then you can actually come up with a regulatory environment that, again, induces better behavior and punishes bad behavior. But and I've done this in my career as a planning director and as a city manager, make assumptions about what's in the city's interest without taking into account the fact that if there's no wealth creation going on, the city is not successful anymore. So the private sector is wealth is created. I mean, the Treasury prints the money, but wealth is created in the private sector. If we could find ways to create that wealth, reduce unemployment, increase investments in environmental quality, improve society through a regulatory scheme that is broad rather than narrow, then I think we have a great chance to make a huge amount of difference.
I'm going to be turning to the audience in just a couple minutes, so get your questions together. I just wanted to follow up with you about, it seems as though you're pretty clear that we can meet economic goals, financial goals, at the same time as we're making environmental improvement. Mm-hmm. Could you talk to us a little bit about the social side, the societal side, societal benefit, and how you work that framework into your decisions, the way that AECOM undertakes projects and works with its clients?
Sure. Well, we do it in a variety of ways. We have a major initiative throughout the company in corporate social responsibility, working with communities around the world. For instance, in our space, AECOM is mostly engineers. We work with Engineers Without Borders and allow people leave time to go work around the world and solving problems. It's good for where they're working, and it's also really good for us because if you work in a company like AECOM, you almost never learn how to solve problems without money. Engineers Without Borders, you learn how to solve problems without money and the role of the community in long-term maintenance. I mean, I've been all over Africa and parts of Asia, and there's huge investments in infrastructure that are just worthless because the community wasn't actually engaged in the decision-making. They were never trained how to operate it. There were no spare parts, all that sort of stuff. So we do that sort of thing. We also, for instance, working with our clients, we design hydroelectric dams. We work very closely on the environmental side with the oil and gas business and with logistics and those sorts of things. Every one of those requires a large bunch of community engagement so that the process of change does not degrade quality of life and so that it improves economic opportunity. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a core to how we approach problem solving with infrastructure.
So there was one question that I promised a student that I would ask you. And she would like to know, can growth, as we've seen in the past century, ever be sustainable?
Probably not.
It's a fine answer.
Let me just say, I once wrote a paper that got some coverage, and it was entitled Devo, Weasels, and Sustainable Development. And the Devo was about, I'm old, so my favorite band, Devo, which was about devolution. So society was devolving rather than evolving. The Weasels is about all the people we pay to tell us it's not our fault, you know. And the sustainable development, the issue there was that the question, can we sustain ourselves, is among the most banal questions we can ask. Because sustainability isn't a choice, it's an inevitability. We cannot exceed our range. We're just like any other species. So the issue is whether we achieve sustainability with some sense of grace or we do it through systems collapse. And I think that the jury's really out on how we're going to manage this. We see human systems collapsing around the world through scarcity of resources. I mean, Somalia is all about food resources. The Arab Spring was about the price of bread, and you know, so all these things are engaged in this. And as I tell my staff, I'm going to do the best I can, but by the time it gets really ugly, if it does, I'll be dead. So it's up to you, actually, to be humble as you go forward in this, because nobody knows the right answer. What we need is a series of best answers that are technically feasible, economically viable, and politically acceptable. And moving that way, and tomorrow you may have a better chance to make more progress, but make the progress you can today.
Let's turn to the audience. I'm sure there's quite a number of good questions. If you raise your hand, a microphone will come to you.
For the benefit of the recording, if you could start by stating your name and affiliation before your question. Thanks.
I'm Gabriel with the Forestry Environmental Studies School. So I have some questions. First of all, I really appreciated that you said nobody knows what sustainability is. I'm wondering if you can elaborate more on how you relate to it from that context. And also, I'm really curious about your corporate culture and how taking on sustainability has impacted your culture, if you could speak to that, and if there's any intentional initiatives along that line and how you measure it.
Right. I relate to sustainability, again, in this notion that human society is in a struggle with limits. And also, in its struggle with limits, it's producing large amounts of waste that are going to make our lives intolerable. And it's an existential question about us. We're irrelevant to the earth. You know, the earth is going to do just fine. It may be different, that sort of stuff. So what are we going to do as humans who are struggling to make sure that our children and their children actually have a life. For me, that's how I relate to it. I don't think of it as a technical idea. Certainly we need to improve our techniques, we need to improve our science, but I think sustainability is a political choice about what we value and whether we're going to continue or not. In our corporate culture, sustainability is one of the bedrocks. I was hired to be the Chief Sustainability Officer by the CEO with clear instructions that our whole enterprise has to be built around the notion that we manage complexity in order to reduce waste, increase efficiency, and improve human lives. And so given our position in the world, and that's what we're doing, and it's absolutely critical. I get a lot of queries. I get to work with the business leadership around the world. I'm invited in because they know it's critical for their business. In China, if they're not making every project more sustainable, we can't work in China anymore. Because in China, they recognize that unless they reduce pollution and increase energy efficiency, that the middle class is going to rise up and challenge the party. Because the party is only a 65-year experiment in the history of China. So there are all sorts of things that are going on in that background. But for us, we don't think we can continue unless we get sustainability, not necessarily right, because no one knows it is, but push it hard on everything we do.
Hi, my name is Hilary Staver. I'm a master's student here at FES. And going back to what you were saying earlier about the importance of context when you're working on infrastructure projects, how does AECOM approach a new project in terms of learning what the context is for the area where you'll be working? Do you go mostly through your client? And I mean, I presume that they provide you with information about the community and the stakeholders and that kind of thing. Or does AECOM go out into the community and contact stakeholders, like other stakeholders, independently of your client and try and do sort of like a broad research, like information gathering effort?
We do a little of both. Sometimes, for instance, if it's a national government client, we don't go and do separate due diligence from what they say. For some of our private sector clients, we do. We have an Office of Risk Management that is very broad spectrum risk that we look at, and they'll go out and do independent research, those sorts of things, because sometimes we'll get information that actually isn't useful in understanding our risk if we're going into the area. So it's a little of both.
Right there in the back.
Hi, I'm Jean Goldwyn. I'm with the School of Management. I was wondering if you could talk about how you and your clients communicate the work you do to sort of the broader, the consumers, to the people who are impacted by these projects, and especially in terms of the sustainable aspects, whether or not that's something that your clients feel the need to emphasize, or if it's something they don't really talk about. Thank you.
Well, first of all, we almost always are contractually bound to not speak on behalf of our client or the project. That's their job. We have continuous conversation with our clients, and sometimes they ask us to help them with their communication strategy. We have a big group that does community involvement outreach in each of our geographies around the world, so we'll get engaged that way. But we don't speak on behalf of our clients.
Right here.
Hi, thanks for being here. My name is Bimbin Pearson. I'm a PhD student here at FES. Earlier you mentioned the dangers of following conventional wisdom and the path dependency that comes with that. I'm just wondering, some would argue that large corporations and institutions in the world are the very agents who are susceptible to perpetuating conventional wisdom. So as a large corporation, what are some of the processes internally or externally that you have in place to prevent AECOM from falling into the trap of following conventional wisdom?
Another really good question. We do it in a variety of ways, as you might imagine, but we have a lot of training. I spent Friday and Saturday in training for how we manage our projects, those sorts of things. But we have a chief innovation officer, and our chief innovation officer is responsible to the CEO for not just driving innovation down, but pulling innovation up. This goes back to the notion that any complex organization, there will be barriers to flow. The top may be critically interested because they're hearing from clients about the changes that are necessary as we do our exit interviews. We do exit interviews for almost every one of our projects, those sorts of things. What could have been better? Those sorts of things. What did they expect to see that they didn't get from us? And then we're bringing in people from all over the world coming out of schools, not of the quality of Yale, of course, but from pretty good schools who have learned things that nobody in our organization has learned. Our challenge is to not do everything differently every day, but to capture the information sets from the people like you who are in the organization and start building a knowledge base so that we can think about problem solving differently. And I have to say that like any major organization, as you point out, it's a daily struggle, because we know how to do things the way we've done them before. And there's some safety in that. And our clients know how people have solved their problem before. And they might think, well, I just want to do it the same way. I don't want to be on the leading edge, and I particularly don't want to be on the bleeding edge because that's where cost overruns come and all that sort of thing. So it's a daily challenge for us, but we recognize that unless we get better at moving innovation up and down, that we won't be successful compared to our competitors.
Can I just follow up on, you mentioned about new people coming into the company. What do you look for in your new hires, generally speaking?
Well,
this might be of particular interest to this group.
In the technical disciplines, of course, we look for technical competence. But ever more, technical competence is not enough to get you in our doors. The social skills necessary to actually collaborate around complicated problems are really critical to us because we're betting our future on integrated approaches to problems. So if we have people who are extraordinarily talented, who can't see themselves as part of a team and feel like they have the right answer and no one else can, and therefore every bit of dissonance is dysfunctional, we can't actually move ahead. So it's this ability to communicate not just via emails, but actually understand the needs of the different people in the group, how they learn, that sort of stuff. So that's critical. One of the lessons I was taught early, and I'm not sure that I'm managing it today, but when I was taught that it is never the audience's obligation to understand you. It's always the speaker's obligation to make him or herself understood. And we need people who embody that notion because particularly in the highly technical areas, it's possible that we can go before clients and have people just assume that if they didn't get it, it's because they're not as smart as me, when our job is to make them successful because we don't succeed unless our clients are successful.
That's great advice. I think we have a question right over here.
much. William Mail from FES. I'm just interested in the aspect of maybe communicating some of the sustainability philosophy to other clients. So if you're trying to engage with, say, potential client who doesn't get it, and who could at the same time maybe benefit from some systematic change in their company culture and structures, would you try to approach them in just maybe at a very superficial level, just to try to get them into the door first, or how would you approach that?
That's another really good question. Clients don't like to be told what they don't know. I think you'll find that through your careers. So it's our job to make our clients successful in their terms in the most sustainable way possible. It's not our job to tell them they have to be sustainable. So there will be huge opportunities through the discussion, and as I mentioned earlier, changing the question set and those sorts of things, so that they can see how being more sustainable actually is great business. Or have conversations with them about recruitment and retention, or safety and productivity. The rule of thumb, at least when I was in the business, the rule of thumb is that the cost of site acquisition, design, construction, and maintenance of a building is 10% of the life cycle cost of that building. And 90% is the salaries being paid to the employees working in that building. And if through sustainability you can get a 1 or 2% increase in productivity over the life of the building, then the building's free. So we have those kinds of conversations with them. And there's not good metrics on that outside of the hospital industry, but the hospital industry is a great proxy because they understand that the right environmental conditions indoors actually relate to the rates of healing. And if they can get people in the bed, make all the money at intake, and then get them out so they have a bed to fill and make more money at intake, that's what they want to do. So one of your big challenges, particularly on the design side, will be coming up with the metrics that the financial community will accept about how better design, better buildings, more environmental approaches actually improves productivity. Because that's the gold standard.
My goodness. Please, right there.
My name is Anna. I'm from the School of Management, and you spoke about communication with the client a lot. I was wondering if you notice any difference in your client's perception when they come from a developed country or developing country. How do you deal with those differences in perception in the sustainability discussion? And can you give an example? I am sure I'm aware you are not allowed maybe to say names, but can you just be a little bit more particular on how you deal with these differences? Thank you.
Well, first of all, in I think every one of our offices, the majority of the people are from the country that the office is in. Because it doesn't work for us to have a bunch of expats going in who have no understanding whatsoever of cultural issues. Trivial example. You go into an Arab country, a North American, try to relax, cross your legs, and show the soles of your feet, you've offended every single Arab in the room. It's the most vulgar thing you can do. And we have to learn that kind of stuff. But it doesn't, that's just trivial compared to how understanding culturally how decisions get made. In Japan, you make a handshake agreement with the leader of the organization and everybody goes back to make that happen. In China, you have to enter at the bottom of the organization and try to work your way up and figure out whether the pathway is the right pathway or the wrong pathway. In Russia, it's different. In Africa, where we work, it's different. So we find that diversity, cultural diversity, is a key to our business opportunities in the world, whether developed or undeveloped. And so we push really hard on all aspects of diversity, and that's how we approach it, because we know that, you know, we're a North American corporation, a U.S. corporation. If we're out there trying to win work in China without having Chinese leadership, we don't stand a chance.
I know we have a lot of good questions, but I think we have time for one more right here.
Justin Lindenmayer, joint degree with the School of Management and the School of Forestry. I'm always fascinated by how sustainability is structured at different organizations. You as a chief sustainability officer, you know, some people may think of that as kind of separate from traditional functional roles versus organizations that don't have sustainability as its own functional role, but is rather incorporated into, you know, finance and marketing and whatnot. So given that at AECOM, you and presumably a team has sustainability as your charge, I'm curious how you make sure that people in the more traditional functional roles also make decisions with sustainability principles in mind, rather than trying to kind of do it through the sustainability team constantly.
Yeah. Well, we're structured. I'm a corporate officer in addition to being the chief sustainability officer and part of the corporate team. And I work for the chief corporate officer. So does the head of safety, so does the head of security, so does the head of CSR, so does a whole bunch of people. And we actually work in a cross-functional team where we define the problems that need to be solved, either being brought to us or what we're trying to do internationally, and to make ourselves more cohesive and make sure that sustainability is an aspect of that. So just a brief example, if I can. We don't own any of our own space. We lease everything. And the head of global real estate is in our Los Angeles office. We're consolidating space for a variety of reasons, but as part of that consolidation, I work with her to make sure all the new space has green leases so that we can actually measure our energy consumption and our water consumption and our waste consumption, and we pay for it, not part of the ground lease, or we pay for it as a separate line item. So reducing it becomes an issue of cost reduction, which increases the attention to it paid by the people who are leading the offices. Because if they're not reducing their costs, then finance is going to come and visit them. And so there's a variety of ways we do that. Integrating it into the business is the key objective for me, so that hopefully our culture becomes one where my role isn't necessary. Hopefully it remains necessary for a little while, but if AECOM will not be successful in the sustainability space if it's always being pushed from above. It's got to be integrated into how we view the world, and it has to be part of every decision we make. So my job is to make sure that I'm working with all the other people who are working in similar space, so that there's a sustainability aspect in everything they do, and there's a safety aspect in everything we're doing in sustainability, and all those sorts of things.
So in our last minute, Gary, you have a tremendously influential job in a tremendously influential company. What keeps you awake at night?
Well, there are the rents in New York, but what really keeps me awake at night is that we're fighting the wrong fights. We keep trying, on the climate side in particular, we keep trying to convince the doubters that they're wrong, rather than focusing on how to make people who are willing to consider climate as an issue, how to help them become more rich. If we can help the people who change and become wealthier and have a competitive advantage over the deniers, then the market will lead the way. But so long as we're just in a pitched battle, and a religious battle over this, and no offense, but science is a kind of religion, you know, it's not purely rational. We're in this ideological struggle over these ideas when nobody knows the right answer. And we can't make any progress that way. So that's what I worry about, is that we've abandoned the notion of reason because it's easier to just fight.
Please join me in thanking Gary for his time.